no meeting checklist. As chair of the planning board, due to the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis and in accordance with Governor Sununu's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this board is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to the meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, this is to confirm that we are A, providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. We are utilizing the Zoom platform for this electronic meeting. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the following phone number, 603-236-4730, or by clicking on the following website address, www.watervillevalley.org. Where B, providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of how to access the meeting using Zoom, and instructions are provided on the Town of Waterville Valley's website at www.watervillevalley.org. C, we're providing a mechanism for the public to alert this public body during the meeting if there are any problems with access. If anybody has a problem, please call 603-236-4730 or email at townofwb@watervillevalley.org. And D, will be adjourning the meeting if the public is unable to access this meeting. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, we will adjourn the meeting and have it rescheduled at that time. And please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. So we'll start now with our roll call attendance. As usual, please let us know if anyone's in the room with you so we know if there are public in attendance. Nancy.
Nancy Knight, member.
Mike.
Mike Coppell, Tina just went upstairs. Mike Coppell, alternate.
Bill. Larson.
I always need you.
Bill Larson. Is he? You don't see him.
No, I don't see his name.
Wendy Rathgeber, member. John.
John Racine, member.
Rich. Oh, you're muted, Rich.
My apologies, Rich Rita, ex officio, and I am alone.
Bill Spence.
Bill Spence, member, alone.
Hey, Terry.
Terry Wade, member, also alone.
Rob.
Rob's muted.
Yeah.
Rob Wilson, alternate, alone.
Nick, did we hear from Bill Larson that he wouldn't be able to attend?
I did not.
All right, well, for the purpose of today, let's just leave it as is. If we don't see Bill in another 5 or 10 minutes, I will get seating on the alternates. That will give him a few minutes to join in. I wanted to start off, I trust everyone received the attachments from Todd showing the updated chart and the new draft text. Everyone has those. I wanted to start off though with a more general discussion. I know we have hashed this left, right, and center. In typical Waterville fashion, I did hear from probably more folks than who actually attended the public hearing. So I just, yeah, yeah, it's part of being in a small town, which is great. You know, everyone weighs in some fashion or other. What I heard was a lot of concern about any kind of daily limit, both concern and confusion. I also took it, you know, a step further and spoke with Chief Noyes as far to try to determine if there is a problem with the short-term rentals currently. They have no records. They don't keep records. They're not in the habit of necessarily asking if there is a nuisance call, whether if the people who are causing the nuisance are there short term or whether they're part of the family or friends or whatever. By reading through each report, you could eventually glean if there's a pattern or not, but he felt like there really wasn't any kind of a pattern nuisance for short-term rentals. Given all that, I'm wondering if we ought not take a step back and perhaps take this as a somewhat phased approach. For the first year, look at making this, putting the regulations out on the zoning, so that it's, and give everyone the chance to vote as far as whether there be short-term rentals available or allowable in LDR, HDR, and the rest. Keep separating those out. But maybe take a step back away from doing any kind of a daily limit. I think there's some consensus that it'd be good to have records. If someone is renting their home for, say, more than 30 days, to have a form filled out with the town so that that's known. But when it comes to like limiting someone, not allowing that more than 30 or the more than 90 that we talked about before, I heard a lot of pushback on that. So my thought was, if we just phase it in, and if we, after a year, it looks like there is a mounting issue, we've done all of our homework and we have a way to implement the greater restrictions. So I wanted to hash that out just a little bit more before we get into the details. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I just had one question. I'm hoping that maybe the second draft, the way it's reorganized, would clear this up. But how much of it did you feel was people not realizing that the LDR was the only district you were suggesting any limits on, David?
Some of it was confusion with that, for sure. But some of it was people who felt like we were taking away people's rights and, not understanding that it's not allowed from zoning yet, but that everyone's been doing it for decades. There was some saber rattling along the litigious lines. So, there are some definite strong concerns.
I also heard a lot of concerns, but I heard them both ways. I heard people that are very concerned about the town imposing restrictions. And then I also heard people say, it's about time the town did something. And I know that there are also, I'm looking at the participants here, and I'm not sure that this matters. But I know also that this would be, I think, a warrant article item.
Mhm.
And Mark or one of the board, the select board people, are warrant item articles going to be postponed and not voted on in March? They're going to be voted on later? Is that true?
No.
It is not true.
Okay.
So all warrant items are going to be voted on March.
This is, if I can just interject, Mike, to answer your question. This warrant article will be part of the official ballot. That is, it will happen on, I believe it's at 9 or 10 March. I'm sorry, I forget.
Whatever it is, yeah.
The zoning ordinances are not part of town deliberative session, and therefore open for discussion and amendment. People will vote them up or down and on the official ballot. And that is going to happen.
9 months.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
If I could ask a question, Wendy, or Tara, the reason we added days, I mean, we bounced around 90 days. This is a bit in the weeds, and I'm jumping through several things we've already done. But to answer directly the question that you raised, Wednesday, Wow, Wendy, was that not, it is Wednesday with Wendy. Was that not because we were trying to preclude the investor coming in and buying up property? That was the reason we came up with limits of a number of days in the calendar year. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
In the LDR.
In the LDR, right? And as a follow-on question, so even if we were to say go with 30 days in the LDR, this would not stop, for example, what was at issue in the Working Stiff Partners case versus the city, I guess, of Portsmouth.
Yep.
Is that correct, Tara? Because then he could have done it if he did it for under 30, if they had this kind of restriction.
The case just clarified that if the zoning ordinance doesn't say you can have this lodging use of the property, and in that case, they owned the property for that purpose next door to their house, then it's not allowed, and that it's
Right.
to the town, and that's what started our conversation months
Right.
ago.
Yes,
So the New Hampshire Municipal Association recommendation was to look at the definitions in your zoning ordinance, and that's why a lot of us in different towns are doing this now, and make sure that it's clear to what degree you consider it an accessory use and to what degree you consider it a commercial use.
Okay, that's agreed. And I thought it was very good research, by the way. And that it was the court that concluded that the plaintiff's use of the property for daily rentals to paying customers, as if it were a hotel, motel, rooming house, etc., was the
But Bill, it's important to understand that, and you'll hear this in all the presentations by all the municipal attorneys on this, that what the takeaway from that case was is that your zoning ordinance needs to define what's allowed as an accessory use and what is actually a change of use that needs a permit. It's
okay,
not-
I agree.
They weren't deciding what that meant in any other town. They just decided the fact that the zoning didn't say it was allowed, so it wasn't allowed, and advised everybody to look at their definitions and be clear.
So I'm just gonna take a pause. It looks like Bill Larson is still not here. Is that correct? So I'm gonna go ahead and seat Mike for this meeting.
Well, I'm leaving around 4:45.
Well, hopefully we'll be done before then.
I hope so, Wendy.
Somebody take that in the minutes, please.
Okay, thank you.
If I just kind of review where we're at and what was out, the 6 amendments, they look quite different than the first draft. Usually a second draft looks similar, but because you wanted to separate some things out by LDR versus the other districts, I had to really rethink how it was gonna be constructed. We couldn't just stuff things in definitions anymore if it was different in different districts. That's why this draft looks different. And the way I've written amendments 1 through 6, that I think reflects what, I mean, it's your job to tell me if it does, but I think it reflects what your instructions were at the last meeting, and then to open the door to consider being less restrictive in what Wendy's talking. I added this possible additional amendment that would mean that if that was a 7th amendment and they were all passed, there'd be no limit on the number of short-term rentals anywhere, not in any district, in any kind of dwelling unit in the town. If everything I've presented here is passed. All that would change at 30 days is if you're just renting your home for 2 weeks while you're away on vacation, you don't need to go to the town and get a zoning permit. That's the 30-day difference. That more than 30 days, it's a different use of the property. Somebody needs to make sure that it meets the fire codes and you need to get a permit. But we took out the language about site plan review, that would be something that really on the planning board's discretion later, when you're thinking about the site plan regs again. No limit on the number of days with the 1 or 2 rooms in an unoccupied residence. Again, that's open to be everywhere, but with LDR separated out. I think, unless I'm missing something, and it's always possible, but I think this covers everything, and if everything was adopted, there'd be no limits.
Because my thought was, just to continue on that roll, is just, at this point, I really do hear the concern, we're pushing for a much denser core. And I absolutely hear and feel the concern to conserve neighborhood feel in the LDR and the residential area. And, my original training's in science, we don't have any data. And so I guess my thought was, if we had a year, or however long it turns out to be, 9 months, for dwellings to be registered, whatever format that turns into, then we would have a better idea of what's happening.
Are you suggesting something different than this?
No, just allowing, on the, I guess it's looking at the chart here, for the short-term rental for more than 30 days, that possible amendment being put through.
Or are you talking about that, or combining it with 6, so that one amendment would capture all the districts?
I feel like we need to keep LDR separate, because that seems to be the area of most concern.
Yes.
I think.
Well, it's the area that is the biggest issue currently when you talk to people in LDR and you hear some of their issues. For example, that's why High Country has done what they've done as far as having a minimum 2-week stay, for example.
Well, and this in no way precludes condo associations.
No, condo associations can do whatever they want.
Or
I think-
associations, yeah.
There's a question of marketing and misunderstanding here. I also got an earful, if I can put it that way. I didn't have to duck any rotten fruit, not yet. But it was and I stood and heard people. But I think there's a misunderstanding of what we were trying to do. And I think there's a misunderstanding of what we are in the process of proposing, at least where it stands now. And I hate to see that misunderstanding drive what we're trying to do. I think what we need to do is market it better, or that is clear up the misunderstanding, as Tara was just pointing out, as to what this actually does.
Okay, agreed. Marketing is vitally important, and we suffered from that last year with the amendments that were proposed.
If you decide today to go on with a January public hearing on a different version, I think it's going to be important to take that into account in writing the descriptions of the amendments for the public hearing notice.
Yep.
And it would be good maybe if some of you took a look at that after I draft it, before it goes to Nick to post.
And I think too, we're trying to keep it all in our head, and I admit that it's difficult, because we're trying to look at all the different eventualities here, or the peculiarities of particular zones. But the average homeowner is going to be looking at a specific zone, specific type of property they have, and want to know what it means for them. So if we can get it less complicated at that level, even though it's complicated in the aggregate, it's really the particular zone and particular property that has to be clear, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to start picking on some of the board members we haven't heard from yet.
Good.
John? John, do you have any thoughts to add?
I don't know, I guess in LDR, I'm still here on that whole, I'm just still up in the air on it. I'm not sure which way to go.
Terry?
Well, before I delve into it, talk to Tara, because I think this is important. I think there's another amendment that needs to be written. And it has to do with, I'm referring to Article 3B application, where the statement says, any use not listed as permitted shall be considered prohibited. I think if you go to the table, you're going to find there's a lot of uses that are not listed as permitted. They're listed as special exception or allowed, something like that. So I think there should be an amendment to that particular paragraph, Article 3B, to say any use not listed in the table of uses shall be considered prohibited. Otherwise, it's a conflict, and I think it's going to be a problem.
Does that mean, Terry, you want to include the table in the zoning regulation?
I'm not talking about Tara's work table. I'm talking about the table of uses.
Oh, okay.
It's a conflict as it is right now.
But Terry, that's not what my question is. A person shall not use any lot in any zoning district in Water Valley except as hereinafter specifically allowed.
That's
And
correct,
allowed, permitted, special exception, accessory.
That's correct, but this statement says any use not listed as permitted. Now, permitted is one of the uses that's listed, but there are several other uses that are listed. I'm just saying it's not a good idea to use that word permitted in Article 3, because the way I would interpret it, if I go to the table and if I see SE, I don't see that as permitted.
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I just can't find that language.
Okay,
What page are you on, Terry?
that's Article 3B application. It's in the beginning. It's before the definitions. Is it after before?
Oh, I see. You're not
Page
talking
2.
about people.
No, page 2. It's just the word.
Yeah, no, I see it. Yeah, I see it now. I get it. I'll put that in Amendment 1.
Okay, that's good.
What are we changing? Wait a minute. What are we changing that to?
Allowed.
Well, not even that. No.
I would say allowed to be consistent with the language at the beginning of the table.
Yeah, but if you don't say that, it makes it even clearer, Tara. If you just say any use not listed in table of uses.
Okay. Yeah, good catch.
Shall be construed to be prohibited.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Okay, now.
So I would, if it sounds okay to.
Hang on, Mark, do you have a follow-up?
I have a follow-up on that issue. Tara, have you seen this in other ordinances, this type of language with this?
Oh, yeah.
construct?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a mistake, really, that's not consistent with the language in front of the table.
So I'm asking the construct that if anything is not listed in the table of uses, it is prohibited.
Yeah, everybody's, I mean, that's.
Everybody's, okay.
If you don't have it, that's really one of the things that came out of the Portsmouth case, is if you don't have it, you should get it in, and I added it to a couple of other towns. I didn't notice it was in 2 places in yours.
I just wanted to make sure that construct of reading the ordinance, that if it was not specifically an allowed use, it was prohibited in that zone, was legal.
Oh, that's how a permissive zoning ordinance works. Absolutely.
Okay, that was a question that came up to me, and I just wanted to make sure that was a proper construct of the ordinance.
Yeah, there are 2 kinds of zoning ordinances, and yours is what's called permissive, meaning if you haven't listed it as permitted, it's not.
Okay.
In response to the Portsmouth case, attorneys have been recommending that you get that statement in there.
Got it. Okay, good, thank you.
I think this was a statement that could be used very well in our, say, marketing approach, because I think that in general, taxpayers are not aware of this.
Yep.
That most people believe that if it's not specifically said in the ordinance that you can't do this, that you can. not that it's prohibited, it's the other way around is what people think.
Yep.
Right. Give me a chance to think about the wording before I draft that amendment, because something that's non-conforming isn't prohibited. So we'll just need to make sure it captures that.
Okay. All right, Terry, I think you had more to add.
I did. I think, I agree, and I think this is what you were saying, that the lower density residential items should be separated out. They should be kept separate from the rest of them, because I think that's where the real sensitivity is on both sides. And it should go in front of the town as a separate item. Let the town decide whether or not they think it's transient rentals in an LDR area or not. But I think, as Rich was saying, at a time, it should be made clear that at present it's prohibited. And so that if this is not brought forth and voted on, it would remain that way. The other thing is that, Tara, when it comes to the definitions of dwelling and dwelling units, 4 or 5 definitions that involve the word dwelling. In reading that case regarding Portsmouth, it was very important that the whole reason they were able to act on it was because the definition of the word dwelling included an exclusion of transient occupancy. So I think it's important that any definition that has the word dwelling in it exclude transient occupancy, because that's going to be 2 different line items on the table. In other words, it's going to be rental and it's going to be transient occupancy that's going to be allowed or not allowed. So it should be specific in those definitions of dwellings that it does not include transient occupancy. And I think it's important to use the term transient occupancy as opposed to transient rental. A corporation buys a house, uses it as a reward for the employee of the week. They come in on a weekend, the next use the house. There's no rental involved. It's a value thing. But using the word transient occupancy would eliminate that.
But that would also limit family members using someone's home if they're away, or, I mean, I think transient occupancy sounds a whole lot, that covers anything, anyone.
But if you read, I think Tara has a, and I think it does include the word rental.
Mhm.
So if it's transient, if it's allowed transient rental, then that would be allowed there, but or maybe it should be a term where value is exchanged or something like that. But it's a tricky area.
Well, I do have for rent in there on purpose because of guests, and I mean, this might be something you want to run by the town attorney, but I was comfortable that by adding a definition for short-term rental that says a dwelling unit designed for residential occupancy that's offered for transient rental, that it would differentiate adequately between that and a dwelling unit that's used for residential occupancy.
I think that's true, in a common sense way, but the article about Portsmouth, and I'm not saying this is the Bible or anything like that, but it just seemed to accentuate that idea that it was very important that the word dwelling not include transient.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could rethink at this late date your ordinance with a changed definition of dwelling unit in mind. I think that would take a lot more work to make sure that we weren't making it not work anywhere else.
Well, Mark, all of this automatically goes by town council anyway, right? So they would alert us if there are any potential issues with this.
Yes. As soon as you have language, I'm going to send it to them. I've already told them it's coming.
So you'll have that input for a second hearing. And I just a reminder for this conversation too, that you're not deciding today what you're putting in front of town meeting. You're only deciding today what you're putting in front of a second public hearing. You can wait and make that final decision about what goes all the way to town meeting when you hear the input at the public hearing.
Right.
So other than fruit thrown at you, there's, there's in a way nothing to lose by adding that Seventh Amendment and seeing what the public input is.
Okay. Terry, did you have anything further, or can I pick on somebody else?
Go ahead and pick on somebody else.
All right. Nancy? Oh, I'm sorry, Bill is here too. Now, Nick, did you note that in the record that Bill's here?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, well, I couldn't find the meeting.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, we're glad that you made it. Do you need anything covered, or you're following along all right?
No, don't stop for me.
Okay. Well, let's hear from Nancy, and then we'll drag you in a little bit, Bill.
It's such a tough problem. I mean, I certainly agree with all the amendments on the table that Tara sent out. The possible additional amendment that, you know, it's from what I heard from one constituent that I'm married to, and he, you know, he had an interesting perspective that it's going to be very difficult in LDR to know, are they really renting it out for 30 days or 35 days? Like, who's going to know, right? And B, you know, the real problem isn't the renting out, it's the having problems with the renting out. So I guess one of the things I'd like to propose is, can we start having the police, can we create some sort of checklist so when they have a disturbance complaint, we can know, is it, you know, a resident, a transient resident, or a non-transient, you know what I mean? So we get that information. I think it's something that the planning board needs to know now. So that's one thought. And the other thought is, why not just allow it without any sort of constrictions, unless we have a problem, and we're now going to be tracking the problems, but be pretty firm on taking care of the problems. In other words, you get one warning, and this is what it was suggested, and then the next time, if the same people are disturbing the peace, they just get kicked out, and the landlord gets fined. Done.
I think that might help with that. I think, Nancy, is that if you're going to, and I'm against it, but if you're going to pursue allowing transient use in LDR, again, I'm against it, then I would advise that you do it as a special exception at the most, because that way there are further restrictions on changing the nature of the neighborhood and noise restrictions, and so it might give you a little bit more control over that.
Wait, how would that give you more control? I guess I don't.
You would have, the applicant would have to go to the zoning board of adjustment to get the special exception, and there are certain additional features that require a special, are required for a special exception, and it might make it easier if those things, after being permitted, were not held to. It would be, it would give you a little bit more tools to handle the situation.
Right, the CBA could put conditions on a special exception for
Right.
things like the number of occupants, number of cars, trash pickup.
So it's allowed for anyone who just follows the rules of the special exception. And then everybody so one complaint, and if you haven't, and if they are transient and you haven't gone through the special exception, there is no second chance, they're out. That's what you're saying? In other words, that's part of the enforcement?
How do you do that?
Yeah, well, you know what? I think this is flipped on its head. we're having non-zoning ordinances driving the zoning. In other words, the zoning should provide for how we want things to develop in certain zones. This doesn't preclude a problem later downstream, but it'll help us shape what goes on in zones. I'm not looking at just what may be going on that's a nuisance. I'm looking more at what we think ought to be going on. So I think that flips it on its head.
Yeah.
We need to get out in front.
What a lot of communities, well, not a lot, there's not a lot of communities, most communities are still at the stage you're at of trying to figure it out. Some have gone with regulations that the select board adopts and issues some kind of permit. The barrier to you doing that right now is that the select board can't issue a permit for something your zoning doesn't allow. So these amendments would enable, I think, what Wendy's talking about, where if there were a problem in the future, then the select board could adopt regulations that have some other requirements.
And just in the meantime, we'd be able to collect some information and know.
Right, but
Because I'm still not fully convinced that all the noise issues are really transient and not, nephews or uncles of owners who are just up for the weekend. Anyway.
I know, that's why getting the data and having the police collect that, I think is critical at this point.
Yeah, Mark, is that something that public safety could do?
Okay. Is there a point?
I don't know. I'd have to talk to Dave about what he can and can't do. We get information about the person if there's a noise complaint or something like that. I mean, when we go to a property, we know who was there and what happened. So we may already have a lot of that data.
Well, when I spoke to Chief about it, he said it's not aggregated anywhere. So each individual report will have it, but it'd be a matter of going back through. And if there are a way to just, have a little spreadsheet, nuisance A was this.
We can go through the records and get that info for you.
I think the purpose of zoning is to determine what type of activity we want to occur in what zones. It's not a question of nuisance or parking per se. It's what do we feel that we want it to go on there. That should be our focus. I don't think we should focus on nuisance or potentially parking or what type of activity do we think is appropriate as a planning board for a particular zone. That's the way I look at it. That's my approach anyway.
Go ahead.
I think we would have difficulty in, that is, the ordinances are intended to say what's allowed, what's not allowed, and that I don't think that we would be taking a step forward if we allowed complaints to determine how enforcement was issued. That either it's allowed or it's not allowed. That is, if somebody were renting a house and there were no complaints, it didn't mean that the activity was allowed or not allowed. It's just that there were no complaints. On the other hand, if somebody else rented a house and there were complaints, then enforcement would come down on that person on example B. So, collecting data, I think, is a very good idea, but enforcement based upon complaints, I don't think is part of what we want to be in our zone ordinances.
Right, but if we have a system in place where we know that we can track in real time the nuisances from transient versus family versus guest, and we get to the end of 9 months and, oh my gosh, 90% of the nuisance calls are from transient rentals, let's take the next step.
Yeah, that is a very good idea, but trying to write into the ordinance, that we would act or not act based upon complaints.
Yeah, I don't think not putting that in, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of lost you though.
No one would do that.
Yeah.
That's not what we would put in an ordinance. That's just what we're thinking.
What would the next step be after we collect the data lead to an our
Would it-
discussion?
Sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, my question was just that if we allowed the short-term rentals across the board and revisit it after the 9 months, whatever it works out to be, after we had that data. So that's just where my thought process.
Okay, so, but then you see, okay, I understand, but then you have the nuisance ordinance, which doesn't include noise, by the way, that we depend on a state understanding of nuisance. Our noise ordinance only refers to construction noise. That's it.
But we do use the state noise ordinance.
We do use the state version of nuisance. So maybe we also need to tighten up the noise regulation. So where we would then be modifying our zoning based on whether a particular activity is a nuisance in a particular zone. Is that what you're saying?
Can I make a comment? I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's
Go
just
ahead.
let Karen respond and then I'll be next. Yeah.
Well, just, the other option is then to recommend to the select board and maybe help them write a set of regulations that register short-term rentals.
Rob?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, to Rich's question, what do we do with it? I slow down because what we do with it after analyzing it and seeing if it falls into what we've drafted, we need that to convince, the town to vote for that. So there would be some metric behind what, rationale behind, how we've written them.
Thank you, Rob. Did you have anything else you wanted to add beyond that?
No, I think all covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bill Larson. Are you in?
What do you want me to comment on?
Well, I had opened the meeting with sort of suggesting we take a step back and as opposed to imposing any kind of limits beyond the 30 days or even previously the 90 days, if we were to just allow the short-term rentals across the different zones, present it in a way so that the LDR should be voted on separately, just as a way to get it on the books as it's allowed, and then to revisit after, a year, but in reality 9 months, if there are issues. So kind of sort of as it is, but make it legal.
I really have nothing to share on this subject.
Oh, there have been some chats popping up.
I was just answering Allison's comment.
Oh, okay.
There's a basic question of fairness here.
What is the question of fairness, Rich?
Well, as I see it, for example, if we, in a current situation, if you have someone say owns a property in LDR, and the person across, say next to them, opens up and uses Airbnb to rent it out on a regular basis because we allow short-term rentals, and that's all fine and good. That is their right to do so. But right now, at the point, yeah,
Right. They believe it is their right.
yes, yes.
I stand corrected. Correct. They believe it is currently.
All right, go ahead, Rich.
No, and so the problem is going to be how, if you depend on enforcement and we don't have a tight enough use table, you could end up with an unfair application based on the fact that some people complain and some people don't.
I see what you're saying. For 30 days? Or could we visit trying to limit for 90 days and just,
Well, if all the amendments passed, it's not written to be a limit. It's written to say you don't need a zoning permit unless you're doing it more than 30 days. There's no limit.
Wendy?
If all 7 amendments passed, nobody has any limit.
I stand corrected, you're right.
You don't want somebody who's just renting their house out for 2 weeks while they go on vacation to need to come and get a zoning permit.
Right.
But if somebody's buying a home to put it on the short-term rental market, that's a lodging business now, and that's a change of use that needs a permit.
Wendy, I'm curious, the comments that I was receiving, and I will say it politely, which basically said, who the hell do you guys think you are to limit what I can do? That's the vast majority of the comments that I've received in the last week and a half.
Yep.
Is that pretty much consistent with what you heard?
Oh, yes.
All right, so I mean, I think we have to put that on the table right out the chute. That's what we are hearing. Okay?
So,
The answer is where the planning,
I'm not saying that's a reason to do or not to
No,
do.
but the answer is with the planning board, and this is what a planning board does, to be tried.
Rich, I fully understand that. All right, but what I'm saying is that the feedback that we are getting, although it's a limited sample, the feedback that we are getting is we don't think you guys should do anything, or you guys should just make everything available, which obviously I totally disagree with. But you know, I'm not a laissez-faire type person, but that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
I just thought I should get that out in the open.
if you add this 7th Amendment and they all pass, you are letting everyone do everything in terms of short-term rentals. So that would be the voters' choice.
Yeah, I just feel like there are so many, we're hearing a lot of, I don't know if emotion's the right word, but we're hearing a lot from people who feel strongly one way or the other. And I'll feel better putting it out to vote and just making sure that the options are there as clearly as possible so that everyone can make sure that what they want is represented.
Karen, amendment number 7 is a special exception for LDR where they have to kind of register their home.
That's not how I wrote it. That's what I think Terry was.
Yeah, that's what Terry wanted.
Yeah, that's what, what,
I don't want it. I was saying, if you're gonna do it, then a special exception would be a better way than just a permitted, because you have a little more control over it. But, well, I'm telling you, I'd hate to be the first guy on a driveway that things, and the last building in started advertising Airbnb for family parties, wedding parties, corporate stays, people that don't know the speed limit on the driveway, think it's a road. I mean, it's just all kinds of things that it just doesn't belong in LDR. And anybody who bought an LDR under the current or the past zoning ordinances could assume that there wouldn't be any of this. So you're changing, there are one or two people that maybe want to buy a house or want to change their use right now so that they can rent, but is it fair to the neighbors? I don't think so.
Terry, this goes back to the basic premise that says people currently have the presumption that they can do pretty much whatever they want, even though the reality is opposite. And the thing that we're wrestling with is how do we reasonable restrictions on and what is a reasonable restriction? And you're absolutely right.
A reasonable restriction is long-term rental. I don't have any problem with long-term rental in an LDR. I think rental over 30 days, I would even go down to 30 days and say it's certainly a lot better than several weekends or almost every weekend out of the year.
Which is 90 days.
We haven't touched upon bed and breakfast at all. Does anyone have any?
And I've kind of talked about it with Terry a little bit, because he and I talk a lot about a lot of different things. And what was recommended to me is that in LDR, there should be a significant restriction on bed and breakfast. Something like the following. The first acre of land you own, you cannot have any bed and breakfast. After that, you could only have a bed and breakfast for areas that exceed a half of an acre, and every bed and breakfast unit that you have has to have 2 parking spaces.
You're allowing a commercial activity in LDR.
I'm gonna respectfully suggest you consider that for next year. It would be, you haven't talked about bed and breakfast in the LDR at all.
Right.
And it would.
I'm just, somebody asked me what I thought, so I'm just throwing it out.
It would
something
be
that
tough
had
to
been-
kind of get that from scratch to a public hearing this quickly.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, I'm thinking about bed and breakfast as well as everyone else. Done a little research, and speaking of data, there are about 15 single homes in HDR that would be able to, with a special exception, if we adopted this, be able to operate as a bed and breakfast. But I'm also taken with the argument that is a point well taken. We can certainly start out with the way we have it here, and like anything else in the zoning ordinance, revisit it and make changes as we go down.
or if it's the way you're leaning, it would be easy on the fly to add an amendment that makes a bed and breakfast a special exception in LDR. Like, I mean, it's cut and paste and change HDR to LDR, or to add another amendment. It's that simple.
Yeah, that would certainly allow a little more flexibility to do it as a special exception in LDR.
And it would enable the zoning board to take a look at the acreage and the parking and put conditions on buffers, parking requirements, and so trash storage.
But that would open up LDR to what is a commercial activity by any definition, which is what we're trying to not have.
Right, that's why you have it right now is you haven't proposed changing that from being not allowed right now.
Right now, it's not allowed, right?
In a circular.
By defining it, thank you.
Nancy? What's your muted, Nancy?
Sorry. Bed and breakfast, seems to be fine, and with not allowed LDR, SE, HDR, permitted VC. Good to me.
Okay. Mike?
I think I can live with it.
Bill Larson? Oh, you're muted, Bill. For anything high today. Okay. John?
I'm
Rich?
I'm fine with it because it defines what's already in our zoning ordinance, and we can return to it at another time, at least for LDR, and it does allow it now in HDR with a special exception. So I think that's a good start.
We think about, is there a town visiting in New England where there isn't a B&B in a large residential house?
One could argue.
Yeah, is in a residential area where you have large restored houses. And the number of us have been, Colleen and I certainly have. I can't recall visiting one that was not in an LDR type environment.
So would you be?
I think that there's a good deal more thinking that needs to be done about this. And I don't think we should jump into it rapidly. It's the difficulty of this entire discussion. But, I don't think we should change it immediately, but I think there's a lot more to talk about. And I think that the town would benefit depending upon how well it's done, having a B&B in an LDR environment.
You're, as always, Bill, you're absolutely right. And especially in resort towns, even if you go up to Jackson, where, we go periodically, you see that in significant numbers of places in residential areas in Jackson, and, almost every other, as you say, resort type town.
Yes. And, towns of significant value, put it that way. That's like Bar Harbor, Maine. There are several, and they're beautifully restored, and they're well run. The issue that we have with this entire matter is, if it's well done and it's managed by capable people, it doesn't create a problem, and it would be good for the town. It's where the nuisance value is introduced that causes difficulty. Anyway, we all know this already, but I'm not entirely convinced that bed and breakfast should be simply outlawed in what we are.
It is now, though.
You would.
I know it is, but we need to.
But the question we have is this: realistically, is our bed and breakfast a topic that we wish to discuss for this year, or do we want to make it known, if you will, that it is something that we will be addressing in the upcoming year?
Well, we do
I
have
think
it
it's where we
addressed.
are.
We do have it addressed at a certain point right now. That's why I'm bringing it up. So that, are you saying we shouldn't put forward that amendment?
Well, the problem we have is that, as Bill said, the place that you would normally see a bed and breakfast is not an HDR, it's an LDR. That's where you see your 2, 3, 4, 5 room, really nice bed and breakfasts. We were, over in Maine in September, and yeah, you saw them all over the place in there, and they were beautifully maintained.
We're not ready for that yet.
I understand the issues, but by the
No,
same
we're not.
token,
We're just making specific. Besides, you already voted, so you can't change your vote. We're only making specific by saying it's not allowed in LDR, what is already a fact according to our zoning ordinance. I see this as dipping our toe, as I think Wendy's trying to say. We dipping our toe by allowing it as a special exception in HDR at this point, and we're doing nothing more, and we're making the definition clear.
right?
We're punting to later.
Right. One of the things Jeannie Mullen
With the on-street
said
parking. I think
is
we said
that, one of the reasons why I specifically said when I talked about it is that for every unit, there had to be 2 parking spaces on your property. I think that Jeannie's absolutely right that if there's going to be bed and breakfast in anywhere, there has to be, you have to maintain that you have sufficient parking on your property in order to do it. I think.
Yep.
I feel very strongly that way.
Well, and I would assume that with a special exception in HDR, that would be held up. Terry, your thoughts?
I'm okay with it the way it is.
Okay, Rob?
Good to go.
Okay.
Can I just clarify, you right now require, well, it says 1 to 1 1/8 spaces for each rental unit in accommodation. So that already applies to a bed and breakfast that was in the VC. because it's already allowed under lodging. What the amendment proposed to change was make this new category of lodging that could be allowed in the HDR by special exception, but it would still be subject to the same parking requirements under the parking table as any other lodging.
Sure. Okay. Well, Tara, would it be helpful for you if we go through the text as opposed to just looking, kind of looking at the table, going through? Do you feel the need to?
I don't, but probably good to see if anybody had any comments on it. I can show it if you want to, if it's gonna be helpful, or not, whatever you want.
Since we do have a few members of the public, perhaps it'd be good to screen share it, just so everyone can be on the same page, literally.
Sorry, that didn't work out. Are you looking at it now?
Yes.
Yes.
No, I never know without asking. So, Amendment 1 doesn't change much. It's more clarifications and cleanup of some of the definitions. Because we're talking a lot about transit use, we'd be adding a definition for accessory use that clarifies we're not talking about non-transient, that if you have a border or two year-round or even for a season, that's still fine. I went through and got rid of all these miscellaneous references to lodging and replaced it with one term for lodging facility that covers all, because there was no pattern to it, really. They were just all used differently. So throughout the ordinance, replaced words like hotel, motel, blah, 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 with lodging facility. Then added this new definition for lodging facility that brings in the condotel, which is why my response to Terry wasn't being lazy or trying to save time, but because you have some kind of blurry dwelling units right now, I think before you start redefining dwelling unit or clarifying what's a residence or not, you really want to take some time and a couple meetings to think about that, not just kind of rush into it. So we've covered that in a new definition to lodging facility. We've defined transient as offered for rent in increments of less than a month, and then a short-term rental as a dwelling unit designed for residential occupancy that's offered for transient rental. Another kind of cleanup thing that's tucked in Amendment 1 too is, the same way we were talking about some people just get away with doing a short-term rental because their guests behave, and another might not because there's a nuisance complaints. The same kind of inequity has been going on because it's not been clear whether you needed to get a zoning permit for a home occupation or not. So we're trying to add clarity to that if it involves guests, visitors, clients, basically anybody else coming to your home for the business, then you need to apply for a zoning permit.
Tara, where do you, in a situation like this, where would you introduce the idea of a fee, a license fee, and that may be established by the selectmen or something like that? Is this the place to do it, or is that introduced somewhere else?
Well, that wouldn't, if you mean like for registering a short-term rental, that's something the select board would adopt under their separate powers to regulate businesses.
Okay, so it wouldn't have to show up here in order to introduce it.
No, it wouldn't go into zoning at all. The tie between the two is they can't do that till the zoning ordinance says it's allowed. If if they decided right now they wanted to have a registration process for short-term rentals, they need to wait until the zoning actually allows short-term rentals.
Okay, so then you're saying the use has to be allowed, not the idea that a fee be charged.
Correct.
Okay.
And of course, there's any, it's also up to the select board what to charge for a zoning application, a zoning permit fee. And I don't know what your fees are now for that, but you certainly could have a, tiered approach. Were there any comments or questions left on Amendment 1 at this point?
No, Margaret, it's not proposed that you need a permit for guests in your home. Sorry, everyone saw that chat.
Yeah, I don't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen. So.
Okay.
Or hands, I just see you and a couple other board members.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Terry, you're gonna add Terry's cleanup on aisle 1 there?
Yeah, I have that in my notes.
But Margaret and Turner had put in the chat,
No, yeah.
was that I need a permit for guests in my home. Needs to clarify, no. Guests, family members.
Yeah, well, I just saw it just before draft amendment 2. I saw something about needing a permit.
For home occupations,
Yes.
the businesses, so in-home businesses and some of what we're proposing for the transient rentals would fall under home occupations, but this is rentals, not having people occupying your home.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think Mark or anyone in public safety wants all that kind of paperwork anyway.
And so, yeah, for Amendment 1, I have that addition in my notes to clarify in the beginning of the ordinance to replace the word permitted, but not necessarily just put listed, but I need to look and see if it should also say non-conforming uses allowed. But anyway, to make it consistent with the language in front of the table that says if it's not here, it's not allowed.
The sentence before it refers to non-conforming uses, as I recall.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at it, so. So Amendment 2 is the one that would let someone rent out 1 or 2 rooms in their home on a transient basis as a home occupation in HDR, BC, or C1. And 3 is the same thing for LDR, so that's broken out.
You listed as, on draft amendment 3, Tara, you're listing it as permitted, not special exception, is that correct, for LDR? I don't have the table, so I don't know how it's listed in the table.
Yeah, no, you haven't discussed a special exception for that. That was in an owner-occupied residence.
But that's long-term, is that correct?
No,
No, it says transient.
Oh, yeah.
no, this is the person who advertises that they're bed and breakfast and they are just renting 2 bedrooms.
Yeah. As long as there's an explanation, that one little word means a lot. Could be easily skipped over if you were reading it on a ballot and wanted to vote on it one way or another. It's too bad you can't have an explanation somehow.
Where do you mean? What can we do better?
I don't really have a problem with long-term rentals in LDR. I do have a real problem with short-term rentals in LDR or transient. All I'm saying is I want to make sure when this goes out to the public that they know what they're voting on. And the little word transit just kind of slips in there. I read right over it, didn't even see it. And I'd hate to have someone vote on it not realizing that it was transient, not long-term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I think it'd be helpful if folks take a look at the descriptions for the public hearing. I like to use the same descriptions for the public hearing as we go ahead and put on the warrant, so it looks familiar. And I think this would be a good point to have everybody take a look at the wording I draft. Normally, I just write a hearing notice and it goes to Nick to post, but I think the wording is easily confused with these topics, and would be good if I'll send it out to everybody kind of individually so that you can get your comments back to me and not have a meeting by email.
Yeah, and I think it's important to do something along the lines of what Rich had written, you know, as you're putting your thoughts down on paper, but perhaps we could publish something along those lines in the wigwag just in advance to help people understand what we're dealing with here.
I would suggest, having gone through this in the past, that whatever the list is has to go before the whole board for approval before it gets published.
Whatever the list, you mean an article is published?
Whatever the article, if it's explaining what these amendments are, it's important that the board review it and agree
Yes.
to it before it gets published.
Yes, agree.
May I ask a stupid question, Wendy?
Always.
This is for Tara, actually. We've agreed that these are going to be severable, right? These are separate warrant amendments.
Right now, I think you're talking about 7.
7. And so if, for example, draft amendment number 3 goes down to defeat, then it defaults to not allowed.
Correct.
Okay. I think we have to make that plain too, when people are trying to understand what's happening.
Yes.
So there's your chance, Terry.
So bed and breakfast, this is, you talked about that a bit. Here's the language that I've put together for that. And I think, yeah, I mean, some of these you just might want to go ahead and put all this language on the warrant. This may actually, I'll contradict myself, but it may actually be a case where you want to put more language on the ballot than we probably will in the public hearing notice, so people can really be clear what they're voting on.
Can particular words, if this is on the ballot, can particular words be emphasized in bold or italic or something like that, or is that not legal?
Not unless you're gonna do it in the ordinance too.
Okay.
Do towns do that frequently in an ordinance?
No.
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 Okay.
So, I had a little trouble. I had to rethink these a couple times, kind of 5, 6, and what would become 7, because you want them. They're going to hang together if they all pass to make a new section T, right? But I had to write them in a way that they were separable. So, so I took you might have noticed that one of the major changes was that I moved the definition of short-term rental from down with these up into Amendment 1. So if none of these passed, and Amendment 1 does, you're going to have a definition for something that doesn't exist in town, which wouldn't be the first time, and it's why we do a cleanup once in a while. But otherwise, it would have had to been repeated in Amendments 5, 6, and 7. So it's a little awkward. It just wasn't, because it's like this gray area use, there was not a clear black and white way to put it in the ordinance. So I did my best here by rethinking it and adding a new section called short-term rentals that would then tie back to that new definition. And one paragraph of this new section T is in Amendment 5 that says you could just do it without a permit if it's up to 30 days. Any dwelling unit in town Amendment 6 would say you can do it more, but you need a zoning permit. And in both of these, I added the language, it's in full compliance with this ordinance and the New Hampshire State Building Code, because we've talked a lot about safety. You don't want it in a dwelling that wasn't legal in the first place, for one thing, and you want to make sure it meets the life safety code. That addressed the main concerns. And if you comply with those, no question, you get the zoning permit with no limitation and be able to do this commercial use in your dwelling. And then what would become number 7 adds up for the LDR. It's a little bit different approach. I was trying to make it clear and separable so that nothing is broken if some of this passes and some doesn't. Between now and the public hearing, it would be helpful if everybody read it carefully, looked at the ordinance, and made sure that I achieved that. We can rearrange things and tweak things, at the public hearing if we're not changing the effect of an amendment.
Okay.
We can make corrections.
Okay.
And I've been told by a couple of municipal attorneys, you can pull things apart and combine them too. So you could decide at your second hearing to turn this into 5 amendments if you wanted. You could drop pieces. You could do everything except change the effect without having another hearing.
Okay.
Tara,
Yeah.
are you saying these possible additional amendments would be there? I mean, if all the amendments passed, would these amendments still be applicable and not conflicting?
Correct.
Okay.
Mark, I unfortunately have to leave in a couple minutes, but let me ask you a question. How much are we going to be able to, after this is brought out at our session, but how much at any kind of town meeting are we going to be able to explain some of this to our?
Not at all.
Not at all. That is my understanding also. So
Yeah.
what happens in January, people are going to have to just take this as written and figure out what it says.
Well, and I think we work together as a board to publish something and help explain in advance for people to understand better.
And we could have a public hearing after we adopt whatever language we adopt. January isn't the last public hearing.
It is.
It will be?
You won't have time to notice and have another one before things have to be submitted to the town clerk. It doesn't mean that you can't have informational meetings.
Okay, that's what I think I meant.
Right, so basically, we can say, here it is, this is what is going to go on the ballot, and we're gonna have a meeting to explain that which we are presenting to you. Correct?
Didn't you do that once before while I've been working with you? I feel like you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we tried it
Yeah, we
last
have.
year. That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
That's what I was thinking of, because I know we've done it, both here and on the school side, which is the other side of my head.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's no limit on your opportunities to make sure people have their questions answered and understand.
All right.
You just can't call it a public hearing because we're not making any changes.
Correct, it is an informative session.
Yep.
Got it, thank you. That's what, because I remember in the past we did that.
That is the way.
Right.
That my other side of my brain, my school side of the brain, that is the way we have always worded it. Okay, I unfortunately my wife is giving me the hairy eyeball because we're going to pick people up.
Blame
Hey,
Tina.
guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Blame Tina.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, I do think it will be critical that we have informational meetings. And I think with the Zoom platform, it ought to be able to open it up for more participation, easier participation among the residents. So that'll be good. If the public present has anything they need to point out, could take a couple minutes. Anyone? Okay. I know we've addressed a few things in the chat. I certainly appreciate seeing other names here, paying attention to what's happening. So at this point, if there isn't any further discussion from the board, would we be happy to hear a motion to put this forward for our January 13th public hearing?
And I'd like to say a word before we get to voting.
Yeah.
This is way too complicated, and the chances that any of the residents will understand this is virtually nil. And for that reason, I would just recommend that we hold off until we can simplify this up in some way.
How would you recommend simplifying it, Bill?
Think the way you do it is you basically tell people you got to vote yes, 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 no, yes. And if you do that, the following will happen. Here's the situation, that we're painting, and here's what we recommend as a board. Nowhere is it. What we're trying to do is get people to vote on what their preference is. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think there's a chance that's going to work.
Well, that's why I think it's going to be helpful for us to crowdsource the language that describes these amendments for the public hearing and for the warrant. What I've provided to you in this is the actual text of the amendments, and you don't want to simplify that. That's going to mean things are vague and mushy and gray, and that's what you're trying to get away from. But we certainly want to be simpler in the way we would describe it for the public hearings, and so people understand what the outcome of the votes is on the ballot. So I'm counting on all of you to give me input. And
Table will be important, I think. Some physical representation so people can better understand. This is an informational process.
so when you make your motion, make sure to clarify that you're adding the alternative one as number 7. Because that's something new for this second public hearing that wasn't part of the first.
Does anyone feel like they want to make that motion, or do we need further discussion?
I mean, I'll make the motion if no one else wants to. I've been doing a lot of talking here. Does somebody want to claim ownership of this?
All right, then I'll move that we take the amendments as currently written to be presented at the next public hearing.
Including the possible additional amendment?
Yeah, well, I'll second that with the inclusion of the possible, not a possible, but of an additional amendment to be known as amendment number 7 as discussed in this meeting. Does that work, Tara?
It's good.
Okay. All in favor, Nancy?
Nancy Knight, yes.
Bill Larson?
No.
Wendy? Yes. John?
Yes.
Rich?
Rich, yes.
Bill Spence?
Yes.
Terry?
Yes.
All right. So we'll move this language forward to our public hearing, January 13th. That's going to be another evening meeting. That'll be at 6 o'clock, as we've been doing our public hearings.
And can we just talk about the timing with Nick? If I draft the new descriptions on Monday, and you guys get back to me Tuesday, I get it, final version to Nick on Wednesday. Is that good?
That'll be fine.
So let's just to have the dates. It's my brain.
So I'll write this on the 28th. You guys look for it that night and get comments back to me on the 29th. And I'll make revisions and get it to Nick to post on the 30th. That way it's not waiting to New Year's Eve.
Okay, so we will have homework on the 28th, 29th.
Yeah.
Sure, not going anywhere.
You better not be.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was daydreaming. What's the next meeting?
The next meeting will be the public hearing, the evening of Wednesday, January 13th at 6 o'clock. And then, of course, we get to follow it up with our regular meeting the morning after,
Right.
Thursday the 14th.
Morning after.
And just a reminder to Nick that you're gonna do the Zoom, I'm turning over setting up the Zoom meetings to Nick so that it's easier to stream live on your end. So this will be the last one that I host today,
Okay.
unless needed in the future. I mean, I'm always happy to, but it sounds like it's gonna be easier to turn that over to Nick now, starting with this public hearing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what time was that on the 13th, Wendy?
At 6 o'clock.
6, okay.
1800 for you, Rob.
That's a Roger.
All right. Is there anything else that anyone needed to address this evening? Afternoon, wherever we are? I'd be happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All right, voting on the motion to adjourn. Nancy?
Nancy, yes.
Bill Larson? Bill?
He's muted.
You're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Wendy, yes. John?
John Racine, yes.
Rich?
Another very nice and well-run meeting, Wendy. Yes.
Thank you. Bill Spence?
Yes.
Herding cats.
Harry?
Yes.
All right, thank you everyone for all your time. And don't forget your homework, January 28th, 29th.
Thank you,
Merry
Wendy.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Everybody, happy holidays.